veel gedroomd vannacht. Ja. Dat je terugkwam. Maar dat het heel fucked up was. Dat je hier helemaal niet meer paste. En je ogen waren anders. Je herkende me niet meer.
Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of Carolyn Talks. This is the YouTube channel / podcast where I speak to film creatives around the world about their work, the industry, and what inspires them. I'm your host, Carolyn Hines, film culture critic and journalist, and I'm very happy to be joined by writer and director Florence Bouvy to talk about her short film, Where We Stay, which premiered at the Palm Springs Short Film International Film Festival and screened recently at the Cleveland International Film Festival. And I'm very happy to be able to talk to Florence about this film because this is a short film. It's about two friends who realize that the love they have for each other is the love they have for each other. But unfortunately happens at the end of a very traumatic experience because one of the characters, Carrie, I call myself Carrie, so I'm calling, that's why I'm pronouncing it, is dying. And it's a beautiful story. And something that I really want to talk to Florence about is how in this film, you carry through every stage of grief possible in this story. But first of all, Florence, thank you so much for joining me. Yay.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Thank you. First of all, so I usually like to ask my guests to say a little bit about themselves and how they got into filmmaking. So I looked at your bio and it said that you studied philosophy in university. How do you get from philosophy to filmmaking? It kind of makes sense actually, because I think a lot of film is about observing human behavior and why we do what we do. But talk to me first about becoming a philosophy major in university and making that transition.
So I always was on the creative path. When I was young, I was very lucky to be growing up with parents who were creatives, in their own way. They did the whole artist struggle. So it was, in that sense, very freeing because they knew that path and really supported me in that. But then after school, I was kind of always in between, not knowing, do I want to become an actress or do I want to become a director? And I took a year off to just kind of let that sink in, to try out different things before diving into something. And then another part of me I just always loved studying. I love taking in new information. Unfortunately, I am a nerd in that way, that I like reading. I like making the summaries on my computer. It's just, if I could go to school forever, I would. We have a very fortunate system in the Netherlands where you can actually, for not too much money, study and try different things. So although I knew I would end up going to do a bachelor in either film or acting, I figured I have the freedom, I have the privilege that I can just enjoy taking in some information. So I actually, the full Bachelor of Philosophy is 3 years. I did it for 1 year because I always knew I would change, but I was like, I don't need the actual paperwork. I just want the joy of learning and seeing this other world. And I was kind of doubting between philosophy, anthropology, psychology, which, they all make sense for film. But I don't know what ended up being my gut instinct to do the philosophy for a year. I think I did a couple intro classes to see. And I just am very fascinated. I especially loved in the first year, you get more of an overview, right? Later, people start to go into much more detailed, but it was just really nice to have so many different ways and alleys of that world. And I loved practical philosophy, which is what we did the first 6 months. And that's all about, what is, what really stuck with me, for instance, is who do we consider as part of our moral world. So, there's obviously that can go really wrong when people only consider a certain part of our community part of the moral world. And then where do we divide? Do we see animals as part of that? What is the distinction? And the interesting part of philosophy is that it tries to theorize these things that we usually have a very gut instinct for.
Yeah.
So, in that case, it was talking about, okay, if you kick a cat, we still see that as wrong. Why do we see that as wrong, but we don't see kicking a tree as wrong? Is it then about experiencing pain? But what if you kick something that doesn't experience pain? Well, so that kind of stuff I found fascinating. Honestly, I don't know how much of it, I'm sure it all comes back in my work, but I just really think that the world and life is all about taking in these experiences. And it was a very, very wonderful year in my life.
Yeah, philosophy is interesting because I've never taken a philosophy course, but I have studied, I've taken like courses in different subjects, but I've also I got my diploma as a paralegal. And in one of our courses, we have to talk about the philosophy of law, and the human behavior, what makes the guilty mind, like mens rea and all of that kind of stuff. But then also like, is it Locke? I always mix up the names, but I think it's Locke and like John and Locke and like the legal philosophers, like when they talk about anarchy, like when is anarchy justified? When it like an unjust law is no law at all. So like so it doesn't deserve to be followed. So like I get where you're coming from, and I always say like kind of things I think helps me in my work as a film critic and a journalist because I have such a broad base of like different backgrounds. From my own background as an immigrant, my upbringing as a Black woman in the Caribbean, being disabled, like invisible. I have MS, and fibromyalgia. I have an invisible disability, so like that gives me a different perspective of how like a visibly disabled person might relate to the world, and how the world relates to them. And I take all of that into consideration for my work as a film critic and a journalist, and where we stay, like what you were saying, like does to me, I reads into the film because, like as I said, one of the things the film really does is considers all of the ways that grief manifests, and that is philosophy. Like there are people that say like, why are you sad if you're angry? Why does grief manifest as anger? Why does grief manifest as joy? Like how do you have joy within grief? Like these dichotomies of like the human condition, as people like to say, but it's also like, how do we think about death? Like that's a very big philosophical discussion. Like, what is death? How do we relate to death? How do we feel death? How do we experience it, and all of that? So, but before we are talking definitely about the philosophy of death in where we stay. But I want to ask you, like, when you made the transition from after that first year, getting your foundation in philosophy and the philosophical studies and discussion, how did that help you adjust to the filmmaking from an academic perspective? Because you're going to two completely different academic fields of study, like where filmmaking, yes, you do get into philosophy, but that's something you'll develop as a filmmaker over time, but that's not necessarily something you'll be taught in school, right? Because you'll be taught more like the practical effects of like filmmaking, like how to develop a story and all of that.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting question. It's interesting because I understand the way it maybe comes across when you read the biography, like, oh, first there was like philosophy and then the film school. To be really honest, if I look at it, for me, I've always come at everything from more of a storytelling perspective. So I think if anything, it was more that I was experiencing what I was studying and when I was doing an academic year, very much through the eyes of a filmmaker. So for me, the shift back into film and filmmaking was very natural. It was very what I've always been doing. But I do think that it's really interesting, in general about film school. It's such an interesting thing, right? About how do we teach creative? And there has to be, I think every school and any institution has to find a way to find their boundaries for that. But at the same time, I think that will always be a paradox because in a way there are no boundaries for creativity. And it is like kind of an unteachable thing. And what I really liked about the film school I went to in the Netherlands, it's called the Netherlands Film Academy. And they are just also very much about the craft. And that's why I picked them, because I was like, I don't want so much someone telling me what stories to tell. I want to be taught how to best tell them. And I think still within that, you'll have, conversations about what is good and bad. You make your films and, you're not just within your year, but you have professors and people judging the work. And that is, I think, that's something every student has to kind of like relate to in their own way. And I think you lose a little bit of your voice in that process, and then you find it back after, because that's the hard thing about, versus where something like philosophy, you can actually academically look at the book and be like, okay, well, these are the theories. And interestingly enough, for me, the whole point about these questions that we're asking in philosophy are often, as a filmmaker looking at it, are things that cannot really be answered. But the beauty of it is trying to grasp it and trying to find ways and structures around it. And kind of similarly with, I think, film school it's like, there is no real answer to what is good film, or what is a working or a successful product. But all you can do is kind of learn about all these different theories or ways to approach it,
Yeah, because it's about that, because that's the thing about art in general, is that you can go to school to be an artist, to learn how to paint, to learn how to sculpt and all of these things. And they can teach you the ethics of it, like where there is a boundary between art. So it becomes where there's a boundary, like, is this really art, or is this something used to torture people? And filmmaking, there's a boundary with filmmaking where you can say, this is my artistic expression. But then, like, for instance, again, as a Black woman, like, where I can watch a film and I'm like saying, yeah, this film is about racism and stuff, but I'm like, you're crossing a boundary where it's like you're torturing the audience rather than entertaining and edifying and educating the audience. And like, there's a very fine line. But the thing is like being able to notice it and delineate it and say, this is a boundary that I will not cross. And philosophy does talk a lot about that. Philosophy talks about like the boundaries of ethics and morality, like you said at the beginning, and in talking about grief and like stuff, there's like boundaries where like you like, I'm angry at you, but how far can I take that anger before I am not being justified in my anger anymore?
I just wanted to jump in on what you were saying. You said it so beautifully about like, it becomes about, you can say, oh, this is my artistic vision, but you're actually torturing an audience. And this is something that really stuck with me. And I think it depends on how you look at film, but the way I look at film is very similar to you, as in, I believe, so there's this book that I was gifted by another director who I did a directing assistance for, and I think it's called Divine Cinema. I'd have to look it up. I'll double check for you. But and it's this beautiful, it's very short. It comes from a more religious perspective, which I'm not religious, but because I like everyone's perspective, I still can connect to it. And they have this beautiful statement, which is, back in the Grecian times, like ancient Greece, art was seen actually as something that could heal you. So if you felt sick and you went to the doctor, they would prescribe a bunch of things, including going to the theater. And it's because we all know that experience when you walk out of a play or a live performance, or you listen to something or you watch something, and it's so beautiful and it lifts you up. And it doesn't all have to be happy, but it's something about when we watch something that's so powerful, and it literally feels like it does something to you, and you feel you're walking differently after. And that writer made such a beautiful point, which is, if art can heal you, it can also make you sicker. And and that changed, it put to word something that I feel with like some films that I watch, some things that I watch, where I'm like, I can have respect for how powerfully it's made, but I can also feel like it's not something I want to bring into the world, because I think it also makes people sicker watching it or listening to it. And that is a personal experience, and maybe for some people it's not, but there's some pieces that are very artistic, very powerful, are really well made, but they're bringing something into our common dialogue that I think is not healing us,
No, I agree with you completely. I have a very religious background. I'm Christian, and I was baptized when I was in my 20s. And ironically, I was talking about this very same thing with another filmmaker last night that I interviewed, and we were talking about how there's something that we as humans are very intuitive when it comes to things that either make us feel good or make us feel bad. Yeah. And sometimes we're not able to voice it, but you just know innately. And like for me, I remember, and I only like something my mom used to do when I was young. My mom would, because I have a twin sister and we have an older brother who's 10 years older than us. But something my mom used to do a lot would be like, when we would watch something, she'd be like, she'd legit come from the kitchen, her bedroom. I don't know. She'd just appear and like, what are you watching? Is this uplifting to you? Like, how does this help your spirit? And as a child and as a teenager, I didn't really understand where she was coming from. A lot of times I think because and it would be like films, particularly like supernatural and superstitious, like with those overtones. And I understood a lot of that came from like having a religious background as well. But then also when I grew up, I understood like she was like saying, are you forcing yourself to watch something that doesn't make you feel good?
Right.
Know? And now as an adult, I don't do that. If I'm watching something, or even if I'm reading a book, for instance, I'd be like, I don't feel good about what I'm reading. And it's not that the story is sad and it's making you feel sad. It's just there's something about it that feels off. And it just doesn't, there's something to watch something and it has a very sinister undertone. And you're like, what is this energy? And like people say, oh, like you're being like too hypercritical or whatever. I'm like, no, sometimes there's just something that I'd be like, it disturbs my spirit. And I'll be like, I refuse to accept that because I just say like, it doesn't heal you. It doesn't help you. Like I see art as like, it can be entertaining. Like there's horror films that I can watch that can be as absolutely grotesque and I can still find a beauty in it, in the story. Like if there's a theme, there's a moral, there's a concept that the filmmaker is trying to have. But then I can watch a romance story and I'm like, there's nothing romantic about what's happening on screen, and like, so like you can have these dichotomies. And I think that's also what makes us beautiful as humans is like, there's all of these things that we can create and like, there's a power in what we create, and then there's a power in how we can perceive and receive art. And even just in our speech and like in our music, like even in the film, the two characters, Carrie and Daniel, they talk about music, they have these perception about this song that Daniel created when they were a teenager. And like, it's interesting how they discuss like how they feel about the song now as adults versus how they felt as kids, and your film kind of touches on what we were talking about, like how there's these things that just, they just don't do what you want it to do. And it doesn't make you feel good. And I think, and I have to say for you as a filmmaker, knowing that and understanding that is actually very important because there's a lot of filmmakers who don't understand that. There's a lot of filmmakers who will argue down that when someone says like, I don't really like this, and they'll be like, but it's my art and stuff. And I'm like, but your art isn't just for you. You're making a film to be watched. And you have to consider how your audience will feel. You have to consider how the people on set will feel while making this story. How do the actors feel? How does the production crew feel? Are they protected?
Yeah. And I think obviously everybody has the right to make what they want to make, but it's not the way I want to show up in this world. It's like, it's for me. And I think that's where my films, it's interesting because I think it would be easy to take what we're talking about and to think, oh, so certain topics or certain things are not, are too depressing or too sad. And I think that's actually my whole point is like, actually, no, I think you can talk about anything. I think it's so easy to think that something is not moral or to think that something is not, that has to be in the confines. I think that actually I'm most intrigued by the painful, dark parts of life. However, I want to always tell them in a way that as an audience member, it's like the same as a friend who's like sharing their personal story or trauma dumping, right? It's like that difference. And there's something about it. And again, it's like, and there is a little bit of the untouchable or the sensitivity, but that, at least to me, it's super important, even when I was making this film, to always look at, I knew that I was making something that is about parts of life that we don't like to look at for good reason. It is a very painful part of our life that we don't want to be reminded of. We don't always want to. And if you are forcing an audience to just go like, and now look at this, it's, I still think that I've had audiences, and most of the time people are extremely moved by it. And I can tell that, you know, and for some people it's not their thing and they are just like, this is boring and slow. And, you know, that's also totally valid. But there are also people who it brings up some very deep, painful experiences. And what I hope is that it's not so much about not having that experience, but that it's in a way where it's releasing something and not just pushing you into the mud and being like, and now you're in pain and I did something to you. You know what I mean? And I even, for me, make a point. I like to be at screenings. Obviously, I can't always be, but I make a point to have the conversations with people after, because I've had people come up to me and I've held people afterwards, just because I think it's so important as human to human to always have that connection and to have that as much as I can to make an experience as healing as possible versus just, you know, leaving you with it. And that's what it is, you know?
And I think that's important for a film like Where We Stay, where it is about grief, you know, and it's about love. It's about love that existed, but love that is growing, but is not going to be able to exist for too long, you know, because this is not a spoiler, people, because it's in the synopsis. But it's like their love is transitioning, but it's transitioning as Carrie is dying, where he's transitioning from life to death. And their love is transitioning from platonic love to eros love, to romantic love. And there's a sadness in that, you know, there's a beauty in that. There's this profound sadness in that. As soon as you find something, you lose it. You don't have the chance to grasp it, you know, and it's sad, and it's sad because that's something that happens so much to us as human beings, you know, like we'll only, you know, people always say you only realize something until it's gone. And there's a difference in realizing it after it has already gone, because the possibility does not exist, but there's a sadness in realizing it as you're actively losing it, you know. So talk to me about that part of the film, because for instance, the story could have been different if they were friends and, you know, like they have their room, they have this loving interaction, and they're very tactile together, they're very peaceful together, and they're showing their love very openly. And it could have been that they stayed friends, like it didn't begin to transition in that moment, because it could have been that after Carrie dies is when Daniel realizes, oh wait, our love was also something different. So talk to me about having it happen right in that moment rather than versus after, because I think there's a very distinct difference in having the realization in the process of rather than after.
Yeah. So I think that's the point. Yeah. So as you said, there is a sadness in that. And there's also the beauty in that, right? Is the fact that for me, the way I like to look at it, what's really important to me is what we are taking a last night, a final hour maybe, in which we get to fully embrace and experience the love as it is, and then it is taken away from us. And to me, that is a little bit a metaphor of how it is in life. You know, everything is transient. Everything is, in the end, I wrote it when I first started writing this, I kind of tried to explain it in my like director's vision. And I said, it's love to me is always something that we lose, because it might be tomorrow or it might be in 50 years, you know, it's something that, and there is a beauty and humanity and value in that fact. That's what makes human life so valuable, you know, the fact that it is temporary, and the same with love. And so I think that's why it was important for me to have this kind of pressure cooker version of that experience for me, that I think that it's this call out for us to be brave and to, no matter what, no matter the fact that you'll lose it, to live life in that moment, you know? So there is that like duality again, where it's like, yes, on the one hand is extremely painful, and on the other hand, it's what makes it the reason why we're alive, you know, to have these experiences, no matter when they are taken away from us. And that could be a long time from now, or it could be tomorrow, you know?
Yeah, like that's one of the things I love about being human. It's incredibly painful. It's just like, oh my gosh. It's like, oh, the trials, the tribulations, the struggles. But there's a beauty, like you said, in temporary. Like we've been given this life, and it's just like, even amidst the painful, like being human gives us the ability to appreciate the beauty in the world that other creatures don't have, you know? Like we can voice our beauty at like a flower. We can voice and give words to the beauty of a sunset. And it's not that other creatures don't appreciate them, because like my dog, she enjoys watching sunsets. You know, like animals, like they can appreciate that beauty, because we see that in the animal kingdom, where animals like they express their love and their instinct to mate and procreate in all of these beautiful displays, like with peacocks and like the birds in the Amazons and stuff. But like we're able to like just like create endless interpretations of it, you know? Like we like I would like you referenced Grecian times, and like that's what they did, you know. They created these marble statues to pay homage to the beauty of the human body, you know, in all its wonders and in all its shapes and forms. And painters of the Renaissance and did it, and like even before, from like I was having this conversation on Twitter, like the first form of communication we had as human beings was humans in the caves, right, drawing the human body on a cave wall, you know, and like showing like the process of the hunt and all of that. Our ability to communicate is what's innate to us as human beings. And for a film like Where We Stay, like you're showing these two men communicating, you know, and that's again something that we see very rarely on screen, especially I would say in Western productions, where you have these two men before they reach the romantic revelation, even as platonic friends, they're communicating, they're laughing, they're crying, they're being expressive. You know, I think one of my favorite point in the film is where Carrie's having an anxiety attack, where his mortality is really beginning to settle into him, and he's realizing, wait, I am dying actively right now. And Daniel brings him down by touching him. And I saw that as like he's grounding him, you know, like he's literally like if Carrie was like a balloon floating away, you know, and like he's holding him back and say, come be here with me, come down here on earth with me. And I want to talk to you about that scene, because that scene, I think, kind of reflected, there's a moment at the beginning of the film where Daniel enters the room and Carrie pulls himself up by the brace on the bed. And then like a few minutes later, there's a sequence where he's like imagining himself dancing. And like, you know, he has his arms up and he's pulling at the same motion. And it's like, he's reaching for something that he can't quite grasp. So I want to talk about the concept of grasping and bringing down, because that's something that happens a few times in the film.
That's really beautiful. Yeah. Oh, you just said so many beautiful things. Let me think through, because there was one other thing you said. Well, let me first touch on this scene. Yes, that's what I wanted to do. So about you were talking about communication and expressing, and then the moment of anxiety that Carrie has. And I think that actually it's a good example of, and then I'll tap into what you were saying about the in-between worlds, but I just wanted to make the point of, in the film, I think we see them go back and forth between expressing themselves and not being able to express themselves. Now, for me, that is just as valuable, right? I think I just actually had quite a personal conversation with my mom the other day, because she was reflecting on this movie was born from when my dad passed away. And she was talking about the fact that after he passed away in the hospital. We knew it was coming. He was on a morphine drip, and it was just waiting for it to pass. And similar to the way that Carrie dies, the breathing stopped at some point. And she was saying that after that, she said, I was so busy with, you know, oh, we have to arrange this and we have to make the room empty for the hospital. Like, she was very, also a common theme in women, of course, is like all she was thinking about is other people. And she was saying that she appreciated that I had a moment where I said, I want to be alone with him. And I actually took a moment with him and spent time with him alone, kind of to have this processing of having a last final moment with him. And she was saying, I should have done something like that. Or I was, you know, she was saying like, I was bad for not doing that, not being present. And I was telling her, I was like, you know, the whole point of also why I made this film is because of experiences like that, where we can judge ourselves for maybe not showing up the way we think we should be showing up. But you, in that moment, not being able to be present is just as real and heartfelt and a sign of your love, because you, at that moment, were dealing with it that way. And it was coming out in that hidden way. You know what I mean? And so I think that's something that for me in the film, these characters are in the first half kind of struggling with truly expressing and feeling and connecting. And at the same time, I think that those moments where Daniel's being angry and mean and saying, well, die, you know, like horrible things, it's just as real, and it's just the poetic version of it, you know, like, so I wanted to make that point to say, like, I think that there's those layers, and then tapping into the other layers, which is the worlds that we shift between and that Carrie is reaching and moving through. It was those scenes were extremely intuitive. So I think a common thread with Carrie obviously is this bodily, the struggles between being stuck in this body that is slowing down. It's also, as we see, you know, Daniel comes in, sees Carrie in this position for the first time, and that scene about him pulling himself up is also about Daniel's pain and having to look away, not even being able to really see his friend. It's almost like seeing your friend naked, you know, it's like this very vulnerable thing that it's almost like he's not allowed to see, or he's not able to look at. And the dancing, it's, I think for me, something that is a common thread through my own experiences, through the research I've done, through the people I've spoken to, is I do see that when we near the end, we start to really float in between worlds or dimensions. Now, I try to not go into too many of like my own kind of spiritual feelings about that in interviews, because I want to have people have their own interpretations of it. But obviously, my feelings about that are a common thread, and something that you're also addressing, which is, I do think that we start to float a little bit. The fact that you call it this balloon, it's really interesting, because when my dad was actually in that final stage, I remember so distinctly feeling like he wasn't in that bed anymore. He was like above somewhere, and there was just this tiny little cord hanging on, like connecting the body to whatever was up there. So you saying that balloon brought that image back, because I'm like, yes, that's exactly. And that's where we see Carrie kind of floating through gently. You know, we don't go into it too deeply, but it is part of the ambiance of the film, is of these molding worlds, you know?
Yeah, because I saw it as like the world, like people would be like saying like the world he's moving between is another world, but I kind of saw it as like he was moving between the present of where he is in this bed and a world where he could be free. And he's free in the sense that he gets to be with Daniel the way they want to be with Daniel. No, that's where he imagines his better place to be. His better place doesn't have to be some far off distant idea of utopia. He's like, I just want to be in this space where I can be free with this person who loves me for me and who I love for themselves. But I want to talk a bit about in all of this beauty, and like in them having this, in these moments of clarity and revelation, I want to talk a bit about the anger, because the anger sits very, I think, center to the film, because when people have experienced grief, like anger is one of the strongest emotions, because you're angry that you can't fix this situation. You know, like when you said, like when Daniel looks away, I kind of saw it that, is almost like he's seeing Carrie in like this completely naked way, but in a way that he had never seen before. You know, and it's like he's seeing Carrie in this extremely vulnerable position where he can't lift himself up properly. You know, he's weak, he's frail, he's thin, he's pale. and he's confronted with the realization, like, the body that I knew this to be is not the body that I'm seeing now, and like, that's hard for a lot of people. A lot of people, it's very hard to accept when their loved one becomes disabled, when their loved one becomes sick, they have to, like, there's a point where you have to physically force yourself to look at the person and see them for what they are, and I know for some people there's a very visceral reaction. Like for me, when years ago, when I was in around 8, 9, my mom fell and she hurt her back. So she was in the hospital for like 6 months. She had to get her spine fused and everything. And my sister and we had to go and live with a neighbor because our brother, who's only 10 years older than us, can't look after us. Our grandmother was elderly, so she couldn't watch us. But I remember like going into the hospital after my mom had the surgery for the first time, and she's hooked up to the machines, and she's in the bed and she can't sit up. And I remember I had to force myself to look at my mom in bed like that, because I'd never seen my mom ever like that, like seeing my mom going from being able to walk and to being like laying down in a bed. And then once she began to do her rehab and everything, she had to use a walker, and so I had to watch my mom learn how to walk again. And I went to physiotherapy with her, and like, that's hard. It's hard to see someone that you saw in one state, and especially someone that you love, to see them in a completely different state, and like that scene with Daniel really made me think of that thing with my mom. And I think that's important. It's important to acknowledge that for the people watching, that it is hard, and it's not that you're being judgmental of somebody. It's hard to like see someone that you love like this. And even for me as a disabled person, like, sometimes it's hard. I get frustrated with my own self when my body doesn't work the way that I want it to work, and I love that you acknowledge it, that you put that there, that you're like, this is just something that is unavoidable.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing, because I think also, I know that feeling similar experiences with not as long and intense as you went through. But I had an experience with my mom when I was 11, and she had like a kind of like a heart attack. It's a whole medical thing, but what I wanted to touch on is the fact that as a child, that it adds an extra layer, right? So it's not just that experience of seeing someone that you love deal with it. It's also obviously touching on the fact that this is one of it shifts your perspective of safety in that moment. So I can imagine, I can only imagine how hard that must have been. And I do think that what you say is it's really beautiful, that it's just as the person watching, or being there or trying to take care or whatever, it is so easy to, obviously we all know how we're supposed to act, or how, you want to take care of the person, you want to love them, and I just wanted to create something that also gives kind of a gentleness or a love to the messing up, to the frustration that could come, or the anger. In his case, it's very extreme, but it's to make a point, because I think, I've seen, especially if you've not, in this case, I see Daniel as a character who's never really been able to deal with his emotions, who's never been taught how to express or, cry, or, be allowed to feel all these things. And his only way is anger. So how easy is it for us to get frustrated with the person? I know when the person I love is in pain, emotional or physical, there is a part of us that goes, I just want you to feel better, no. And so I think there is a part of us that you have to be gentle for in yourself, that it's going to hurt to see someone. And so it's really easy to take that, in this case, in Daniel's case, to take that frustration out on the other person, and so that's why it was really important for me to have that anger in that way, and to show someone who really had no other words or expressions than this anger that he didn't know where to put. And in this case, it's been projected onto the person he knows he's not supposed to give it to, but he can't help himself.
Yeah, when he said that, I actually didn't think he was being cruel or thoughtlessly cruel. I think he was just be like, the reason he said just die, the reason he said it was just stop making this pain last for the both of us. Just end it. you know, and it's like, and he doesn't, and it's not like he actually wants him today, but it's just like he's saying, like, why does it have to be so painful? Why does this process of dying have to be so long? Why can't it just be instantaneous where we don't have to like go through all of these different emotions, the anger, the rage, the frustration, the resentment? Like that's another thing, like the resentment. He resents him for dying. He's like, I resent you for being sick. I resent you for being someone that I don't recognize. I resent you for making me and making you have to, even though like Carrie being sick isn't his fault. It's like there's this there is this this innate response, human response to like blame people for things that are beyond their control, you know, like when someone gets sick, they're like, what did I do to deserve getting sick? You know, so like it's almost think you're just like he's like, I resent you for making us have to go through this. So he's like, just die.
Yeah, that's exactly true. I think that resentment is a really big part of Daniel. I think it's something you said about the stages of grief. It's something that shows up for all of us in different ways. That scene specifically, that sentence, will die. It's very interesting that that's how it translated for you. It was a hard one to translate in the subtitles because there is so much happening in the layers of like language and stuff that it was difficult for me to capture really what's happening there, because for me that scene was really about also Carrie in his way being mean and cruel, because he can't let anybody close and he's so terrified. Clearly we see that in the second half, but he can't open that wound, because then we see what happens when he truly looks at it and truly opens it up. So he's running away from it by pushing this person that he loves away and telling him, you know, you're the one who's afraid. You're the one who's, and that's where this feeling of Daniel comes from, saying, oh, like, you're this hotshot, you're this tough guy. Like, what are we even, if you're so tough, why don't you just die? Is it really that easy? Because he's trying to make a point about Carrie in his own way running away, but it's a very kind of nuanced moment that was hard to translate. But I also think that there's truth to what you say, to the feeling of perhaps there is part of us that just wants it to be over. You know, that's where for me a lot of this film being so open and being so like meditative is. I'm all for everybody having their own interpretation, because I think that's what makes the story. That's why I like to have a bit of an open ending, because it's what the narrative is within you and what you need to take out of it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want us to talk now a bit about the casting of them, because like this is one of those films where the acting makes or breaks the characters. So talk to me about casting Michael Muller for Carrie and Emmanuel Ohene Boafo to play Daniel, because they play these characters beautifully.
It's incredible. Their connection is really something else. And I'd been working with Michael on a couple of projects. So when I wrote it, I always knew that he would be Carrie. And then for the casting specifically, I worked on this with Purple, a production company, and they actually gave the great idea, which I'm very thankful for, to, instead of do like casting, you know, where you come in for 30 minutes, you do the monologue 3 times and we choose someone, to do only with 6 people, like work sessions of an hour and a half, where we just really take time to work through scenes. The reason why that was really important for this and for me and for my style as directing is because I also like to direct in a certain way, which involves a lot of long takes. We sometimes did takes of an hour and a half on set, where I'll give assignments and things and moments while we're shooting to kind of create this momentum. And that's something that, as an actor, that's why I knew I wanted to work with Michael, because I'd done this with him before. Mm-hmm. That's something that has to work. That's also a chemistry thing, right? So it has to work for the actor. They have to feel comfortable doing that, because it also is a level of surrender to me, to allow me to kind of guide you through that and to trust that I will take those moments out that lift you up and not, cut you up and make you look horrible. And so it takes a kind of free fall from the actor to do that as well. And then obviously also for them to be able to go to this place, which besides my way of directing is extremely vulnerable and has to tap into parts that you have to be able to go to, feel safe with me, feel safe with, in this case, Michael, and for Michael to feel safe with Emmanuel. And once he came in, it was just, I still have the take of that moment where they have this conversation where he talks about, I had a dream about you and you came back and you didn't recognize me. And it blew me away. Like the one tear that actually Emmanuel has in that moment, like it happened even in the casting. And it was just like, I had it on I think we shot it on a little DSLR or something, and I still have that material. And it's just, yeah, he brought something to the role that was really special. And then the way that we were all working together was very special, in a very intimate setting with an extremely intimate crew. So even all the crew members, I wanted to talk to everyone before even people came onto the project, just to get a vibe check in a way, because it's such a, everybody had to be able to kind of go there,
Yeah, because as you said, we've been discussing the emotions for these characters go through. They're very. Hold on. The sun is
sunning.
Yep. Just right there. Okay. Yeah. As we've been discussing, the emotions that these characters go through are very intense, and they happen very quickly. The film is only 20 minutes long, but they go through this entire journey, very emotional journey, in a very quick succession, go through all of these different emotions very quickly. And I think the way how you shot this visually is very interesting, because they start out separated. Daniel comes through the door, Carrie's on the bed, and he looks away when he sees Carrie pull himself. He sits in the chair, but his body's turned slightly away, where again, he still can't fully acknowledge how sick Carrie is. He can't fully acknowledge that the person he's looking at is not the person he's known. And then gradually their body starts to shift to face each other slowly. And then they end up on the bed, Daniel ends up on the bed comforting Carrie, he kisses him on his forehead. And then once their emotions really start to really come to the surface of just how much they love each other, then they start to get more physically intimate. But that kind of, I think, translates to or reflects the way for the actors, how their progression as actors within the characters has to start as well. They start out as strangers if they've never met before, and then they have to gradually grow closer over time to create these characters and to feel these characters. And because it's all taking place within one night, within, for instance, an hour, 2 hours, they have to do this all very quickly. And we have to, as the audience, have to buy into it completely, and I think they both did a fantastic job. And you and your casting crew did a fantastic job casting them. So I want to talk about that, just the progression, the physical progression, they move, they're starting to turn slowly together and till they end up inhabiting the same space. It's almost like Daniel wants to climb into Carrie and Carrie wants to climb into Daniel. So talk to me about that.
I'm trying to remember exactly, because the process was so we shot this for 6 days. And there was so much intuition and takes that we did and things that I walked them through. Trying to remember, all I remember is that we shot it all as chronological as possible because of wanting to, it's the kind of script where you really have to feel what you've shot so that you also know where you're going. The biggest thing for me was that it was also really important to have, again, safety on set, obviously with physical scenes and it being more allowing for a little bit more improvisation, we'd have very clear kind of cues on what they were doing, but also it was very up to, at that point, they had gotten as comfortable with each other that I think also they'd been shooting enough with each other that there was a lot of safety between them as well, that, it was just really important that those boundaries are always respected. And I think especially sometimes with men, you know, we have to respect those boundaries just as much as we have to with women, you know, and I think it's important that everybody feels safe. So it was a very, we shot that a couple of times, and I do know that we had it that there would be a kiss. But in the end, like the intimacy of that and like the length of that actually really happened on set, and like is something that happened between them, and was again a testament of kind of where they had gotten in both safety, that there was the freedom to kind of sink in like that, and also of how far they had developed these characters, that it was able to kind of blossom in that moment, you know?
Yeah, and I love it because it does feel natural, you know. It does feel like once they reach that point, they realize, oh, again, like we have this limited time to really take the characters where they can go. So like this is how we can justify their growth as characters and the journey that they'll eventually meet at the end. And it's just like, if that intimacy hadn't been reached, the story wouldn't be the same. Like the impact of their story and what it means wouldn't be the same. And in talking about just the actual production of it itself, like we talk about their acting and stuff, I want to talk a bit about the lighting and the cinematography, because the lighting is very interesting. Like most of it like is dark on the outside peripherally, and then the light is kind of just centered on them, but not directly centered on them, because like some of Daniel is still in shadow and some of Carrie is still in shadow. So there's only like this half of them that is in light, because they have like the bedside lamp, right? But the bedside lamp doesn't cast a white glow. And I want to ask you about that, about just the making sure how white you wanted that light to shine, because you could have gotten a lamp that casts a bigger light, but you wanted one that you had to find one that I guess gave you the right amount of light that you wanted to show us that these characters are still sitting in darkness, you know, like, because death is encroaching, you know, like death is there just like slowly closing in on them.
So lighting was extremely important because of also the fact that we're so like stuck in one room, and they go through such an arc, that it was really important to me to find ways to tell their story, to emotionally still, you know, express this story and also visually help with that, but at the same time play with what we had. And that's where I do love the use of kind of leaning into the practicals we have and, you know, strengthening them with what we have, obviously what we bring to the set. At the same time, because of the way that we shot, there was a lot of kind of not 360 movement, but we had to have a lot of freedom for camera to move. But for me, what I really talked about with the cinematographer is wanting to incorporate, you know, starting with these kind of like blaring, the TL kind of like thing that's above the bed, which is what we recognize from, you know, the hospitals that we go to. This kind of, it's, you know, and actually, again, interesting, when my dad was passing away, I remember him in that light, but we also knowing that it would be his final kind of days or stages, we actually ended up bringing in a little lamp with more light and ended up plugging that in there just to give something a little bit warmer and cozier and homier. And so similar in this case, we have him in more of a hospice setting, but I wanted to play with, when do we turn certain lights on? We start with this coldness, then we bring in a little bit of warmth, and in the end, all the cold lights kind of leave us. And we're really in this super intimate, you know, there's only certain details we see lights. And then at some point, I really wanted to lean into it almost being silhouettes. And I think that's kind of this constant in the film is, you know, there's also we're grasping, you know, we're not really seeing that much, you know, at some point, even in cinematography, when they have a super intimate moment, all we see is like almost an eye of Carrie, you know, or like almost like only the outline of Emmanuel. And I think that kind of leans into the fact that there's something about when we get to that level of intimacy or emotionality, we're touching on something that we do kind of lose sense of the space around us, and it does become just about these tiny little things. So I think that leaning into that and getting like slowly sinking into this physicality and also of this world was really important to me. And to kind of in that way still create an arc in this one space that we're in.
Yeah, I like that we don't really get to see them completely because like, there's not like a big light just shining on them. So we get to see them in like full relief. Yeah. I kind of like that we are still kind of left to imagine like who they look like as complete people because like we sometimes it's like sometimes no matter how long you know someone, you can never really completely truly know someone. And like same thing with ourselves, like we don't sometimes we're learning about ourselves every single day. We're learning about our own limits, our own how far we're willing to go, how far we're willing to take something, whether it's emotionally, physically, financially, with regards to limitations. But there's like we as human beings, we're always consistently evolving. So like we never fully know each other and know ourselves, right? So I kind of saw it as like a reflection of like Daniel is now learning who Carrie could be as a romantic partner, but that chance is like going as quickly as it possibly can. So it's like he's like, I don't get to see Carrie in this light, because the time is running out.
Yeah. And I think that's so true. And I also think that, I don't know, sometimes, especially, when the person we love, when we look at them, we see so much more than the maybe a random person on the street. You see someone and you're like, oh, there's that person, but we actually see all these layers or parts of them that go past that. And I think that sometimes visually, how do you find the translation of that? And sometimes it's by actually showing less so that we can connect more to the experience of it and less to, I think that's always a little bit the balance. Even within this film, how much do we tell about, their backstory or what's Carrie sick from, all these things that I think sometimes we want as an audience to grasp onto, but I also want to take away some of that so that we can't intellectualize and we have to, be present. It was really interesting. I had someone in Cleveland come up to me and they said, I was so frustrated at first because I was like, well, what's happening? And like, why are they doing that? And what's the backstory? And he said, and then I realized like I was so forced to just be in the moment with them. And it ended up being kind of this like meditative experience for him. And he said, so thank you for forcing me to not think about that. And it was, and that was really wonderful. And I think also he obviously looks at it from a different perspective or experience because he was American, and he looks at it from an American experience. Maybe as a European, I have a little bit more acceptance for less information, but also that makes it so wonderful. Like everybody has their own experience with, the piece and with a film. And in this case, that frustration ended up giving him something. So that was very nice,
Yeah. One of the last questions I want to ask you is I was going to ask you about making the film in the Netherlands versus the US, right? But then you said something about the language, about translating it from Dutch into English and like the nuances that don't exist in the English language that exist within the Dutch language. I wanted to ask you about that because what it was one of the reasons you chose to make it in the Netherlands and make it in Dutch is because the language allows you to get more with less. And I say that because there's one of the reasons because I've learned I'm not fluent in any particular language, but I've taken classes in different languages like Mandarin and Japanese and Korean and stuff. But one of the things that always fascinates me about a lot of other languages is that they can have one word that has such a vast expression and vast context and meaning to it. Whereas for English, we have to use a lot of words to get the same context out. And even then sometimes it doesn't really fully explain it, because I think the ironic thing, I think one of the reasons for that is because the English borrows from so many different languages. Like but you know what I mean? Like we kind of lose the poetry of it in that sense. I wanted to ask you about the choice of, because I was going to ask about why we don't know who they, like what jobs they had. We don't know any, but then I thought about it. I was like, we don't need to know anymore. All we just need to know is like, this is who this is where we're meeting them at. This is where we need to accept them. But I wanted to ask you about the choice of filming in the Netherlands and using Dutch, because I was like, is it because Dutch is more poetic and more mellow? You know what I mean? Like English can be like
I think you're the first person ever to call Dutch poetic, but yes, I'll take it. No, I think you make a really good point. That actually makes me realize maybe I moved to LA now a year ago, and I was always exhausted. I still get exhausted from the language just because it's not my first language. So obviously I'm kind of translating. But maybe it's also the amount of use of words, as Dutch people, we're obviously a very crude, what do you call it? Blunt culture. As in general, we're a blunt culture, but I think our language also. So I know that, for instance, Dutch language has like kind of we don't have a melodic line in our language, whereas English does. And so when I say things in English, sometimes my partner will be like, yes, I did that, because she thinks I'm angry, but I'm really not. I'm just not using the melody. So I'll say like, oh, did you get the bag? And she's like, yes, I did. I saw. And I'm like, oh no, I just asked if you got the bag, but I'm supposed to go like, did you get the bag or something? I don't know. Like
that's more to do with how, like, in LA, so like you're LA, like that they have what they call upspeak.
No,
right?
True. Yes.
So like, because like in my Bajan dialect, like people, when I speak in my dialect, people say I sound like I'm singing, because the way how like our language does flow. But when I'm speaking without my dialect, it's very different. Like the tone, intonation is very flat. Like even my voice, my vocal range changes. When I'm speaking in my Bajan dialect, my voice actually drops.
Yeah.
Right. So like what you're saying, I kind of get, but I'm just like, it's not that like English itself is like this. It's just mainly more like the dialect and how like people in the East Coast, no, that's the West Coast, they do an upspeak. Because when I went to LA, it was the same thing. And I'm like,
no, for sure. They specifically also have the upspeak, but I will say, and English isn't even that melodic, but compared to Dutch, it's more melodic even. But also then add on to that the California like upward inflection. But no, the choice, I based this on the fact that we won a wild card. It's a prize with my graduation film. The Dutch Film Fund gives you a prize where you can basically make any film you want to make for a certain budget, which is really wonderful. And so that's what this was born from. So it was made in the Netherlands because I was in the Netherlands and it was there. It wasn't a specific choice, but I will say, obviously, it's very interesting to make a film, that has such a small community that speaks that language, and to see how it translates. And I think for me, and maybe that's why I'm also always very open to anyone's interpretation, because I just believe that whenever you make anything, music, film, a painting, a photograph, it's going to translate to anyone from anywhere that's different from where you grew up, even if they speak a different language, if they grew up in a different culture, if they grew up in a different part of the world, or even just with a different, family that they grew up with, it's going to translate different to them. And I've had, it was a huge experience for me when my graduation film started going, to different places. And I remember going to Japan, to Kyoto. And this film is about a young girl. She's like 8 years old, 7 years old, and she is growing up with a father with addiction. And it's about her trying to fight for love and safety. And, there's this scene where, in general, I think she's quite, strong and, has to sometimes take care of herself. But there's also a moment where she walks in and he's sitting in the room and he's just smoking and he's just very cold and distant. And, and she walks over and she sits on his lap and she takes his arm and she puts it around her. And I remember in the Q&A after, they were like, oh, she also really takes on the role of a wife, like very like almost a mature role. And I was asking, like, because there wasn't really anything specific that I had that experience with.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, why do you say that? And they were like, well, there were a couple of things. And one of them was this moment where she puts the arm around her. And that for them, that was a much more mature thing to do than a child would do. Where for me, that was actually a very childish thing to do.
Yeah.
Ask so directly and just put that arm around you. Yeah. And I realized, like, oh, that's so beautiful, because that means that this in Japan, there's a very different culture related to how we are physically with each other, how maybe we talk to each other. So even though you translate it or put subtitles on it, the story is going to be different, and I think that's the beautiful thing. And that's something to embrace, is that everybody is going to have their own experience with it, and it's going to make people laugh more in one part of the world, and it's going to make people feel completely uninterested maybe in a different part. That's the beauty. So I think that's very interesting about doing a film in Dutch, which nobody speaks that language.
We know what speak that language. You speak that language.
Yeah.
No, but it's kind of interesting that we're going to end up wrapping it here, because that is kind of where we started talking, about philosophy, about interpretation, and how we as human beings, we read something and we can watch the same thing, look at the same thing, and read something completely different into it. Which is why I love art. Which is why I love film. Because you were just saying something that was very interesting that I think I've thought about, but not really deeply, is while the dialogue, the subtitles can tell us exactly what the characters are saying, we can interpret the things they're doing very differently.
Yeah.
They can say something, but it's what the actors and what the characters are doing that can translate very differently. For the Kyoto audience, they understand what the child is saying because the dialogue says it, but they're interpreting her physical actions differently based on culture. Yeah. So I think that's one of the beautiful things about film. It allows us to really think and step outside our own preconceptions and our own assumptions about culture and about people and humanity, and shows even the way we move and the way we hug has multiple interpretations and multiple meanings.
Yeah, that's exactly why it's the most beautiful thing, is to hear people's own experiences with it or their own interpretations, because it opens that dialogue that we can have for each other. And that's, for me, the reason to tell stories, to connect to each other, to see on the one hand how similar our experiences within that. I do think we all, no matter where we come from, have a very similar kind of core experience of being alive. But then there's also all the different contexts in which it happens, and so the difference, and at the same time, the similarity in that is kind of the beauty of, these connections, and these always to keep that dialogue open and to learn from each other in that way. Oh, that sounded very, very over the top. Sorry, but it is, I do mean it. I do mean it.
No, but that's right, because it is meant to be deep, it is your art, and you have deep and intense feelings about your art. And I think that's important. I don't think as a filmmaker, you should have shallow feelings about the art you create. You shouldn't have shallow feelings about the world that you live in, the life you're experiencing, because then your life is going to be, your art will be shallow. Your art will reflect that, and I don't know why, but the song from, the musical Chicago, where she says that you can live the life you're living, you can live the life you like, but at the end of the day, it still has to have meaning in some way. I don't know why I thought about Chicago, but that's,
it's my partner's favorite musical. So maybe she was coming through.
I love that musical. Okay. I love the film. But that's it. I think we should have intense emotions and feelings about everything. My mom would say just coasting through life. And I'm I don't believe in just coasting through life, because then when you reach the end, all you're going to have is shallowness. There has to be some kind of depth to it. There has to be something for you to look back on and really cherish and miss about it. Right.
But then the only side note I will give, which is, I think that's all the meaning, and we can experience life as deeply as possible. And at the same time, I would say also to always keep having fun, and that it can be light and it can be joyful. And I think that's the balance, right? It's we can experience all these things, and we can be as deep about them as possible, but also the importance of joy, especially, nowadays. I think, we are also very much allowed to see the beauty, and to keep experiencing that, because I think that's going to be a really big strength for all of us.
I agree. That's going to be the thing that gets us through it. The ability to stop and smell the roses, as we say, Thank you so much for this interview, for this discussion, Florence. It was so great to talk to you. And thank you for this film. I always find it funny where sometimes I'll watch a film and it correlates to something that I've been thinking about in my life a lot recently or experiencing. So for your film, like it kind of did make me think about the things that I went through with my mom when I was younger, and how me myself as a disabled person, I'm learning to like navigate through this world with the body that I have that is changing and being frustrating shoulder. But yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. I'm really happy, and I'm happy to connect to you about it, and I'm very grateful for the conversation.